Is my area of focus has been slightly different because there is already a lot of work that has happened on labor. So when we discussions got expanded to artists, artisans, and labor. And the reason is that India's culture and India's base, if I may call it, the heartbeat of India is in the villages. And we have had artists, artisans, and labor. All these are important in very different ways. And unfortunately, this is still not a very organized sector. If you look at any of those, that includes the Vishwakarma community, for example, who have been playing a very significant role in India's history, whether it's blacksmiths or goldsmiths or any of those people who are highly skilled artisans. So my focus is slightly different, and I'll be focusing more on the cultural aspects, which touches on labor, because ultimately culture is what? Culture is a group of activities by people. So I'll fit it into the context. From my understanding, on May 12th, the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, announced the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan with a big economic package of almost 20 lakh crores, which is 10% of India's GDP. In my understanding, it had two big aims. One was to make the country independent against the tough competition of global supply chain. And the second was to empower the poor laborers, migrants who have been adversely affected by COVID, which my previous speaker has already touched on. And I'm also very happy that we have a government which is very receptive and taking decisions. I understand that a recommendation was made to create a repository, database of migrant labor, which was accepted and implemented very quickly. So it's one thing to make recommendations and reports, and as we all know, sometimes they sit on shelves. But here is a different situation because these will be acted on, which is very, very reassuring, and that will make a big difference in this country. Now, the other reason is the group that we are talking about, which is artists, artisans, and labor, is a very large population. It's very rural, it's marginalized, and poor. So, from whichever angle you look at it, this initiative is a high national priority. There is no question about it. And Dr. Bose, as a one man commission, has a large role to play in this to make sure that all these segments are addressed. So again, we have had initiatives in the past which fragment things, and we start looking at one piece and we don't look at the whole piece as a whole. It's like the human body because we have different parts, but if they all don't work together, we don't have a healthy body. And from the report, I can see that he has covered a wide area of recommendations, a very, very wide set of recommendations. Now, let me go into what some of those are and why they are important. There are some pillars on which the success of these recommendations will depend. The first one is that you have to strengthen the traditional arts, crafts, and labor, and that including Vishwakarma communities. And I would also stress on fishermen. We have a large thousands of kilometers of coastline, and a lot of people live on fisheries. And inland fisheries also very important because we had done a study for fisheries before, and there are a lot of recommendations which can still be implemented. Then, once we have this, we have to look at two sides. One is the supply side, where we have to create a decentralized and a vibrant rural economy with a lot of inclusion of people who have been marginalized. So, mainstreaming of them, and that will also create employment, a lot of employment for people. So, that's the supply side when things get created. So, if you look at the demand side, creating a strong domestic market, which is also part of the Atmanirbhar program, is that we have to create a local demand for local products. So replacing imported products. And also in this process, many of the products that we have traditionally had are environment friendly. They are biodegradable. And that will also lead to economic sustainability. So strengthening traditional arts and crafts, stressing the supply side of the equation and the demand side of the equation. Three more things. One, demand side also includes global. Now we call it soft power, we call it cultural exports. So India has a lot of art and literature and products and services which can be exported to expand influence of India. Now, if you get China as an example, that's what they have been doing. So we need to play the same game and increase, if India wants to be a global power, we need to increase our global demand for our products and get part of their mind share. And that's also equally important. And in doing this, one of the important pillars, the fifth pillar, will be utilization of technology for planning, design, transactions, everything. There are things like artificial intelligence, you got Internet of Things. So we can bring that to get higher quality of our products and services, lower cost, and also massive reach out globally. So a musician sitting a Gharana in let's say in Lucknow, for example, can be teaching a student in any part of the world. So a student can be sitting in Amsterdam or sitting in New York and can have lessons from this teacher. So there is a huge possibility with technology for expanding and pushing out Indian products and services into the global market. And finally, all of this, at the end of the day, we have to regain the national pride. We have, unfortunately, in the beginning years of our history, free India, we haven't had products of high quality because priorities were different. And so we depended on imports, and a lot of us believe that, the imported products are better than Indian products. Those days have to change. We have to have national pride in our own products and services and then push it to global leadership. So these are six pillars, as I said, as an opening to this, because these six are important for both the creation and the sustainability of the recommendations that are done. Now, Dr. Bose has a huge set of recommendations. In the interest of time, I will touch on a few broad groups, and I'm sure it will be expanded out as we go along into further discussions. The first set of recommendations is suggesting some new institutions to be created, set up as seminal or nodal organizations for the development and implementation of national strategies and also for ongoing coordination of the activities. The second is policy interventions. So there are policy changes, programs, or projects which can be implemented through existing organizations or existing entities. That's a second group. And the third group is a set of recommendations for the welfare of the artists. Now I'll just touch on two or three major institutions which are in the recommendations. One is a national mission for art and culture. It will be a flagship entity for promotion of India's culture, soft power, with an external focus globally. The second would be an art authority of India as a seminal agency to nurture, promote, propagate art, craft, and traditional knowledge and skills. So this will lead to several other things like creating a national registry for all labor, artisans, and artists. Today, we don't even know who the artists are, where they are, what their skills are, and which will also lead to a unique identity card system. So we would know all our artists where they are, which is the basis to start working on an ambitious program like this. Then a national security board to provide social security to artists. If you look at the COVID situation, there were artists who were starving, but they were not attended to as much as migrant labor, to be honest. There were musicians, I know a lot of them who had no work, but there was no attention, there was no organization, there was no specific focus on those kind of activities. And the third will be a time-bound project for the digital transformation, which I mentioned earlier. Another interesting recommendation is to create an Indian art and cultural service, which is as part of the Indian civil service, which can lead to appointing of cultural emissaries in all the embassies. Because there is a lot of cultural exports that can happen. If you look at Hollywood, for example, it's a cultural export. If you look at BBC, it's a cultural export. If you look at British Council, it's a cultural export. Russia had a strong program of promoting their books and culture in other countries. So we need to start getting into that because we want to be a world power, global power, and this is part of that. And finally, establishing Indian cultural centers in all the big countries. So these will showcase our culture, activities, products, services. And an example would be the Chinese initiative called the Confucius Institutes. China has started this some time back, and they have almost 500 institutes worldwide, including four in India. So they are pushing out Chinese culture, Chinese language, and through that, they're creating influence in these countries. So India Cultural Centers is a very, very important recommendation in this. And then, of course, there will be issues to solve. So probably specialized tribunals, which can deal with the issues of artists. Then there are other recommendations. I just mentioned them like Art Festival Board to showcase Indian arts and forms, Indian Premier Art League events like IPL or ISL. And another important one is to have an international publishing house. A lot of Indians write today in English in all Indian languages, but we don't have a good publishing house, which is global. To Still we go to people like Penguin or international publishers. Nothing stops us from creating a very powerful publishing house, not only for Indian literature, we can publish all literature from other countries as well as an international brand. The other one is an equivalent of BBC, like a TV channel for infotainment for the world. So we have so many channels, and we've got all the technology, all the people to do this. The only thing is to have a focus and create a channel which is globally targeted by an Indian organization, so an Indian TV channel for the world. And the last one to me is the extremely important recommendation is a global Buddhism propagative program. Now, Buddhism is Indian. Unfortunately, Buddhism has been adopted by, fortunately, I would say, Buddhism has been adopted by many other countries, so it's still alive and very vibrant. But we need to push an initiative to research, publish, and build a Buddhist community across the world. Now, let's look at programs. And two or three of them are very important. One is to professionalize the education, whether it's a carpenter or a musician or a painter or a dancer, to have professionalized education and certification process. Because the quality of these have gone down because of lack of patronage. In the old days, the kings, the mosques, the churches, the temples, they all were sponsors for these events. And now that role has to be taken by the government to make sure that we don't lose these very important art, etc. Then conferring professional status for artists. Now, I find that many artists are invited to do online shows now, but they don't want to pay them. If you call a carpenter, you call a technician, you call an AC mechanic, you pay them. But still, many artists are not recognized as professionals, and the need to pay them for what they do. And so establishing a professional status for artists is extremely important. Then in universities, establishing academic chairs, introducing art education schemes, and naming them after maybe eminent artists. Then introducing Indology as a subject. We don't have Indology in many Indian universities. Many foreign universities have that. Then the Gurukula system, which needs to be revived, which was a very powerful system. And as I mentioned earlier, with technology, Gurukula system can be expanded worldwide. And that will be very powerful for professions which require a long apprenticeship, like music, which takes years to learn. That's possible. Additional legislations to safeguard the interests of artists, and a centrally sponsored scheme, probably to provide tools, equipment, necessary accessories to artists. Nobody's doing that. And also short-term measures like providing a 6-month assured basic income package for suffering or people or artists who are poor and cannot find their livelihood. There are a few others like setting up heritage and art villages, promoting art as a part of all these as a part of tourism. Heritage villages can showcase the best of Indian tradition, and it'll be a very interesting thing for building and integrating with tourism. Then creating art and craft festivals, which can showcase these things. And so there are a whole load of recommendations around how these can be propagated or promoted. And one important thing I would mention is establishing an e-trading platform, because these products can be traded across the world. Many of our traditional products like bamboo, a lot of bamboo products, uh, wooden products, etc., which are all biodegradable and environment friendly, can have global markets because the world is very worried about the environment. And so there is an opportunity for there, and creation of a very powerful online platform can really push this forward. The export of Ayurveda, yoga has already taken a good step in this, and also Indian consultancies. The Americans push a lot of their thinking through their consultancies. If you talk about the top 5 consultancies, none of them is Indian, except TCS, which is which like TCS, we need to build more consultancies which can spread our message, the Indian way of doing things, into the international world. Another one is IITs and IIMs, who are established, excellent institutions to push out and start working with other centers of excellence in other countries. So we actually export the excellence rather than saying that we are affiliated to Harvard. It's the other way around. These institutions are affiliated to IIT or IIM. And there are many other programs to beautification of public walls. You can have paintings in government offices. There's a lot of smaller activities on a relative scale, which are also extremely important. Now, another important initiative, which I'm very personally interested in, is to create a high potential women writers team. Identify 30 or 40 women writers and train them, coach them, counsel them to produce their first major work. Because writers influence culture, influence thinking. And so it's a very important aspect of cultural development. Now, the third part, so I've looked at the institutions, I've looked at some of the recommendations. The third part, very quickly, I'll go through 2 or 3 of them, is to protect the artists and provide some welfare activities and social net for them. So developing permanent opportunities at the panchayat level or linking with tourism, as I've said, giving more representation to artists in the Rajya Sabha, for example. Then more opportunities for special projects for women and youngsters. Building artist homes or converting some of the homes where people can come and sit and create safe places for women to work. That would be important. And one big group is how do we reward or create social security for the artists? Launching a policy for fair and equitable remuneration. There is no minimum wages for artists. Most professions have. There is no pension scheme for artists, and there is no health insurance for artists. These are some of the things we could take up
Oh,
because artists are left out. Teachers, increasing the number of awards and honors for teachers. And finally, the last point I have is to strengthen the piracy control, because today's intellectual property rights is very important for artists, and many of them don't know about it. They don't get the support for it. So creating an institution or a program by which we protect the rights of the artists through their intellectual property registration will be extremely important.
etc. Now my question is to Mr. Rajasekharan. Mr. Rajasekharan, you have been the advisor to the government of India, especially in fisheries sector. Your many advices were reflected in government policies. Now, what are your views on Dr. Bose Commission report, especially on fisheries, which had dealt in detail about the fisheries? Mr. Rajasekharan, please.
So there is an elephant in the room because which is the sheer size of this project. If you look at it, there are so many dimensions to this. So one of my concerns is that how we are going to stage this, because we cannot implement all of them at the same time. Like any of these big projects, there is a phasing or a staging of this that needs to happen, which comes from two things. One, the relative importance of things, and also the relative urgency of things. So there needs to be a professional work done around the recommendations to look at resources, look at time, and look at priorities to say, how do we face this? Because there is so much on that. That's my only concern about this report, because it's fundamental. It'll change India forever in a way it needs to change. But the change is huge. So the whole change management is something I want to put on the table. Coming back to your question on fisheries, our recommendation on fisheries was done several years ago. I think it was in 2002 or 2004, after which the NFDB was formed, National Fisheries Development Board was formed. And we were commissioned by Dr. Ayyappan, who was the head of fisheries at that time under ICAR. So we gave a very, very detailed set of recommendations, some of which have been implemented. Now, I'll tell you the biggest challenge in fisheries from that report. One is that the marine fisheries is overexploited. You cannot do any more increase in marine fisheries because the sea is already overexploited. At the same time, there are a lot of people, fishermen, who live on that. So they have to find a different way of expanding their work and their livelihood. And the answer is inland fisheries. And in many countries, inland fisheries have made huge differences. For example, we have the World Authority on Fish sits in Hyderabad. His name is Dr. Mogadudu Gupta. He was one of our consultants. He has got the World Food Prize for fisheries. Now, he has changed the life completely in Bangladesh, Cambodia, many places, rice growing cultures, where there is a parallel fish growth along with with the rice paddies, you flood rice paddies with water. And in 40, 60 days, they grow fish with it. And it's a second income for women. So there are so many possibilities with fisheries which we have not explored. We have not actually pushed. The second thing is our preferences are very different. Like in West Bengal, for instance, the preferences for who are big fish eaters, preferences for freshwater fish. Whereas in my state, in Kerala, we prefer more of sea fish. So this requires huge infrastructure, whereas Kerala has got a lot of water bodies, and it's possible to grow a lot of fish in India, which may not be consumed in Kerala. So you can grow it in one place, but you need to have reefer containers, you have to have transportation mechanisms, storage facilities to make sure that this gets distributed, because the preference in India is also for fresh fish, not for canned fish or stored fish. So there's a whole bunch of things there, but it's a large community and it's a very important community, labor community, the fishermen, and that needs to be addressed. And the last part was also getting higher standards into it, like creating like patented fish shops. So it may be small porter cabins we give to traditional fishermen who will be given equipment, tools to clean fish, so that you get cleanliness, hygiene, and a standardized approach to selling fish, which can be very decentralized, which can be set up in near shores, near fish markets. So franchising concept to bring standards into this. So there is a whole set of recommendations. The other one was to lease reservoirs, like, dams. We have so many dams and so many reservoirs, and they are huge sources of fish if you grow them. And with some innovative ways of transporting it downstream as well. So there were so many recommendations in it. We did a very major work on that. But to be honest, I don't think a lot of them have been implemented. So I was talking to Dr. Bose because of his energy and enthusiasm and interest, saying that why don't we look at it again? And there may be things which we can implement, which will make a big difference to the fishermen of this country, and to the nation, and to the nation, and to the economy, and to the user, the consumer as well. So that's in a gist, very quickly about that report. And thank you again, Mr. Goel, for organizing something like this, which brings us into the public domain, and it creates those essential discussions which are important to take such initiatives forward. Because as Dr. Bose said, it belongs to the legions. So we can only be at best, some catalyst or a broker or a bridge between things. But at the end of the day, it has to be owned by the people. And that comes from a strong set of communications like what you're doing. So thanks to you, Mr. Goel, as well. Thank you.
Because of the paucity of time, one suggestion in brief to the government or the advice to public.
My only suggestion is to engage the public-private partnership modes in a much bigger way, because government cannot put all the resources and the requirements are large. So getting engagement from private sector, corporate social responsibility funds, there is a lot of funds available, a lot of resources available. So it needs everybody to work together. So that is my only suggestion.
Okay, thank you very much.